CCTV camera of scammers is hacked. Their reactions are bizarre. It was just another ordinary day at the call center, or so it seemed. The place hummed with the usual buzz of ringing phones, clicking keyboards, and murmured conversations. On the surface, nothing was out of the ordinary. Rows of employees sat in their cubicles, their faces lit by the soft glow of computer screens, completely absorbed in their tasks. But if you looked closer, you could sense something else, a tension simmering beneath the surface like a storm gathering on the horizon. In the center of it all was Rajesh, a seasoned employee who had been with the company for years. Rajesh prided himself on his ability to handle anything that came his way. He knew the ins and outs of the business, the shortcuts and the tricks to keep things running smoothly. Today he felt no different, as he settled into his chair and adjusted his headset. He was ready for another day of the same old routine. But the routine was about to be shattered. Rajesh's morning started like any other. He greeted his colleague Vikram with a nod, exchanged a few words with Priya, who handled the administrative side of things, and logged into his computer. His screen flickered for a brief moment, a small glitch that made him pause. But Rajesh was not the type to get rattled by minor technical issues. He brushed it off and continued with his work, unaware that his tiny glitch was the first crack in the facade of normalcy. Welcome back to PlotTwister. Before we unravel today's mystery, don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the notification bell so you're always in the loop. As the minutes ticked by, Rajesh began to notice more strange occurrences. A phone rang at an empty desk, and when he looked over, there was no one there to answer it. The CCTV monitors on the wall behind him flickered, showing static before returning to the usual feed of the office floor. He felt a slight unease creeping in, but he kept it to himself. This was just another day, he told himself. There was nothing to worry about. Yet the feeling lingered. Rajesh couldn't shake the sense that something was off, something he couldn't quite put his finger on. And as the hours rolled on, that feeling only grew stronger, like a shadow lurking just out of sight, waiting for the right moment to make its presence known. Little did Rajesh know the day was about to take a turn that would leave him questioning everything he thought he knew about his job, his colleagues, and himself. Rajesh settled into his routine, pushing aside the nagging feeling of unease. He went about his tasks with the same precision he'd honed over years on the job. The sound of typing filled the room as he entered data into the system, his fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. He glanced up occasionally to check the monitors on the wall, which showed the live feed from the office CCTV cameras. The familiar sight of his colleagues going about their work brought a brief sense of comfort, but that comfort was fleeting. Across the room, Vikram was hunched over his computer, deep in concentration. Rajesh noticed how quickly Vikram's fingers flew over the keys, his face a mask of intense focus. Vikram had always been the tech wizard of the office, the guy everyone trusts and turns to when they needed help with their computers. Today, though, he seemed more absorbed than usual, barely looking up from his screen. Rajesh wondered what Vikram was working on but decided not to ask. He had his own work to do. Priya, on the other hand, was busy organizing files and taking calls. She moved efficiently, her usual calm demeanor never wavering. Rajesh watched her for a moment, admiring her ability to juggle multiple tasks without breaking a sweat. She caught his eye and gave him a quick smile before returning to her work. Rajesh smiled back, but the tension in his chest didn't ease. As the hours passed, the small, strange incidents started to pile up. Rajesh noticed that his computer lagged slightly every time he tried to access certain files. The phones kept ringing, sometimes with no one on the other end. A few times he thought he saw something odd in the CCTV footage. A flicker, a shadow that didn't belong. But every time he looked closer, it was gone. The rest of the office seemed oblivious to these anomalies. His colleagues continued working as if nothing was wrong. But Rajesh couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The glitches, the strange phone calls, the flickers on the screen, it all seemed like more than a coincidence. Yet he didn't say anything. He didn't want to seem paranoid, didn't want to admit that the tension was starting to get to him. But as the day wore on, the tension only grew, coiling tighter and tighter, waiting for the inevitable snap. Suddenly, without warning, every computer screen in the office went black. The familiar hum of the machine stopped, replaced by an eerie silence. Rajesh stared at his blank screen, his mind racing to make sense of what had just happened, his fingers hovering over the keyboard, but nothing responded. He wasn't alone. Around the room, his colleagues were all frozen in confusion, their faces illuminated by the faint glow of the overhead lights. For a moment, no one moved. Then the panic started to set in. Priya was the first to speak, her voice breaking the silence as she asked what was going on. Vikram, usually calm and composed, was frantically trying to reboot his computer. but it remained stubbornly unresponsive. Rajesh felt a cold sweat forming on his forehead. This was no ordinary power outage. Something much more serious was happening. He got up from his chair, trying to keep his composure as he walked over to Vikram's desk. Vikram barely looked up, his face twisted in frustration. Rajesh could see the anxiety in his eyes, the same anxiety he felt tightening on his chest. Vikram muttered something about a possible system failure, but his words were tinged with uncertainty. Rajesh knew Vikram well enough to recognize that he was out of his depth, and right now, Vikram was drowning. As if to confirm Rajesh's fears, the CCTV monitors suddenly flickered back to life. But the footage was distorted. The images were twisted, faces warped, movements jerky and unnatural. It was as if the cameras were being manipulated by some unseen force. Rajesh's heart pounded as he watched the screens, his mind struggling to process what he was seeing. The room filled with a low hum, a noise that seemed to vibrate through the walls, growing louder and more oppressive by the second. The panic spread quickly. Priya was on the verge of tears, her hands shaking as she tried to make sense of the chaotic scenes on the monitors. Vikram's frustration boiled over into anger, slamming his fist on the desk as he cursed under his breath. Rajesh could feel the situation slipping out of control, the room teetering on the edge of chaos. But as much as he wanted to calm everyone down, he couldn't shake the dread gnawing at his insides. This was only the beginning. Something much darker was unfolding, and they were all caught in its grip. As the tension in the room reached its peak, every screen in the office suddenly flickered back to life. But instead of returning to normal, they all displayed the same chilling message in bold red letters. "We are watching you." The words seemed to pulse on the screens, filling the room with a sense of dread so thick you could almost touch it. Rajesh's eyes locked onto the message, his breath catching in his throat. This wasn't just a system glitch. This was a direct threat. The room fell into a stunned silence. Everyone frozen as they stared at the screens. The only sound was the hum of the computers. Now back online, but under someone else's control. Vikram was the first to break the silence, his voice shaky as he whispered that this was no ordinary hack. His fingers danced over the keyboard, desperately trying to regain control of the system, but the message remained, taunting them with its simple, terrifying clarity. Then, as if the situation couldn't get any worse, the CCTV monitors began showing something even more disturbing. The screens, once filled with distorted footage, now displayed clear, high-definition video clips. But these weren't just any clips. These were recordings of the employees captured without their knowledge. Rajesh felt a chill run down his spine as he watched a clip of himself from earlier that morning, adjusting his headset and nodding to Vikram. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. They had been under surveillance the entire time. Their every move recorded and now played back for them to see. Panic erupted in the room. Priya let out a small, terrifying gasp, her eyes wide with fear. Vikram's frustration turned to full-blown panic as he realized the depth of the invasion. Rajesh's mind raced, trying to piece together what was happening. Who could have done this and why? His thoughts spun out of control as the paranoia that had been creeping on him all day finally took hold. Rajesh's eyes darted around the room, landing on each of his colleagues in turn. Suddenly, very small, insignificant moments from earlier in the day seemed suspicious. Vikram's intense focus, Priya's calm efficiency, had they known something? Were they in on this? The thought made Rajesh's skin crawl, but he pushed it down, trying to stay focused. He couldn't trust anyone, not anymore. But the one thing he knew for sure was that they were all in serious danger, and whoever was behind this was far from finished. The room was thick with tension, the air almost crackling with fear and confusion. Rajesh knew they couldn't just sit there, paralyzed by the shock of what was happening. He needed to take control of the situation before it spiraled even further out of hand. But as he looked around, he saw the same terror reflected in everyone's eyes, and it only fueled his own growing sense of dread. Vikram was furiously typing, trying to break through whatever barriers the hackers had put up. His face was slick with sweat, his hands trembling slightly as they moved over the keyboard. Rajesh stood behind him watching the screen, his heart pounding in his chest. Every few seconds, Vikram's face would twist in frustration. Another dead end reached. Another layer of the hack revealed to be more complex than the last. But then something changed. Vikram's fingers froze on the keyboard, his eyes narrowing as he stared at the screen. Rajesh leaned in closer, trying to make sense of what Vikram was seeing. On the screen was an image, grainy and pixelated, but unmistakably the face of someone on the other side of that hack. The figure was cloaked in shadow, their features obscured, But there was something about their presence that made Rajesh's blood run cold. The figure moved closer to the camera, their face still hidden, and then began to taunt them with exaggerated gestures mocking their helplessness. The sight ignited something in Rajesh. He couldn't just stand there and watch this happen. Without thinking, he grabbed Vikram by the shoulder, urging him to dig deeper, to trace the signal and find out who was doing this to them. Vikram, fueled by Rajesh's urgency, doubled down on his efforts, his fingers flying across the keys once more. As Vikram worked, Rajesh turned to the others, trying to rally them to keep them from completely losing it. Priya was barely holding it together, her eyes darting from screen to screen as if expecting something to jump out at her. Rajesh could see the fear in her eyes, but he needed her to stay calm, to stay focused. But just as Vikram seemed to be making progress, just as a sliver of hope began to emerge, the lights in the office flickered and then went out completely, plunging them into darkness. The hum of the computer stopped, the screens went back, and for a moment, the only sound was the heavy breathing of terrified people. Rajesh's heart sank as he realized how deeply they were trapped in someone else's game. This wasn't just a simple hack. It was a full-blown attack, and they were at its mercy. In the suffocating darkness, Rajesh's mind raced. The fear that had been gnawing at him all day now threatened to consume him completely. But then a flicker of light caught his eye. The screen slowly came back to life, one by one, casting an eerie glow across the room. Everyone's eyes were glued to the monitors, their breaths held in tense anticipation. On the screens, a new message appeared. You have one chance to stop this. Make the right choice. The words hung in the air like a challenge, daring them to figure out what it meant. Rajesh could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him. He knew that whatever decision they made now would determine their fate. Just as he was about to say something, Vikram broke the silence, his voice shaking. He had managed to trace the signal, but what he found shocked him to the core. The signal wasn't coming from an outside source, it was coming from within the building. The realization hit Rajesh like a freight train. The hacker was one of them. Rajesh's eyes narrowed as he scanned the room, suspicion turned to cold certainty. There was only one person who could have done this, someone with the skills and access to pull off such an elaborate attack. He turned to Vikram, his gaze piercing through the darkness. Vikram's face was a mask of guilt and fear, his hands trembling as he realized the secret was out. Rajesh didn't need to ask the question. Vikram's expression said it all. He had been the one behind the hack, the one who had turned their world upside down. But as Vikram stammered out a confession, Rajesh's anger turned to confusion. Vikram hadn't meant to hurt anyone. He had done it to expose the illegal activities happening at the call center, something he couldn't live with anymore. But the hack had spiraled out of his control, turning into something far more dangerous than he had ever intended. For a moment, Rajesh didn't know what to say. The fear, the panic, the chaos, it all suddenly made sense. But now they had a choice to make. Vikram's confession had revealed the truth, but it was up to them to decide what to do with it. In the silence that followed, Rajesh knew what needed to be done. With a heavy heart, he turned to the others and explained the situation. They couldn't continue working in a place that thrived on deceit and exploitation. They had to shut down the illegal operations and report everything to the authorities. It was the only way to make things right. As they began the process of shutting down the systems for good, the tension in the room began to ease. The fear was still there, but now it was mixed with a sense of relief. They had faced the truth, and though it was painful, it had given them the strength to do what was necessary. What are your thoughts on the twist we uncovered today? Comment your ideas below. Make sure to like and subscribe for a daily dose of drama and mystery. See you later with another twist.